Hello, and welcome to From Here with a View, a We Are the Seeds Philadelphia podcast. I'm Tailinh Agoyo, your host for this episode. I recently sat down with Patricia Tarrant, Executive Director of American Indian Community House, also known as AICH. Since 1969, AICH has been a vital hub for Indigenous community, health, and cultural programs in New York City. In this conversation, we explore Patricia's journey as a leader, the profound legacy of AICH, and the future of Indigenous cultural work in urban spaces. Here's our conversation. So this is great because we are here in Philadelphia, yes. In a podcast studio at 1315 Philadelphia Building, which is really exciting. Mm-hmm. And we don't often do this in-person situations. So I'm really happy that you were able to come all the way from New York and be with us today to answer a few questions for our From Here with a View podcast.
Yeah, this is my fourth time, I think, in Pennsylvania, or Philadelphia, I should say.
Really?
Yeah, I've only been here maybe 4 times in my life, so that's the experience.
It's really nice to have you, and thank you so much for making the time to come down, because I know you're very, very busy. So you are the Executive Director of the American Indian Community House in New York City, which is a huge job. And I was wondering if you could share with our audience a bit about your background and what led to your role as Executive Director at the Community House.
Yeah, so I'm a Mandan Hidatsa from North Dakota. I'm an enrolled member of the Hidatsa Mandan tribe, and I'm a Knife Clan member. And I also was born and raised in New Jersey, so I grew up going to the American Community House. From when I could barely walk. Both my mother and my brother worked at the community house, and my sisters as well. So it's been a family affair, I could say. And I started working at the community house when I was 14. On Saturdays I'd work, or after school too, I'd work there. Oh, wow. And then when I was a senior in high school, I did a work-study program in high school. So I went to school in the morning, and then I would go to the community house after work or after school, and I would go there and help out with Rosemary and help out around if, the food bank needed help or the clothing bank needed help. I would help the clients as well. And when I graduated high school, they asked if I had any plans afterwards, and I didn't really have college plans. I was, already had a quote-unquote professional job in a nonprofit. So they asked if I wanted to be a full-time employee, and that's when I started working at the community house. 2006, full-time was when I first started working there. Wow. And then I worked there until 2017. I took some time off to take care of my parents and became their caretaker full-time. And then they passed away in 2020. And when they passed away, AICH asked if I could come back as a consultant at the time. And so I was part-time during that time. And then about 2022, I became a full-time employee. And then I was doing that role for a bit, and then I became the deputy director for a bit. Mm-hmm. And the previous director, Ben Jibo, he works at McGill University and Bellevue Hospital, so he was wearing 3 hats at a time, so he asked if I could be the co-director for a short time, and then he just became more involved with his research study and his doctorate, so he asked if I wanted to become the executive director, and that's how my role really started. But I've been a lifetime member of the community house, and it's really near and dear to my heart because it's a safe place for natives, I guess, in the city. For them to come in and, be seen and be heard is one of the, our missions as well.
That's absolutely incredible because you rarely get an executive director who is so immersed in the community that they're working with and understands, just down to individual families and people, and they have a perspective and scope about the community and what the needs are. Mm-hmm. I was so excited when I heard you were moving into the executive director role. It just made so much sense. Mm-hmm. And under your watch, it's just been thriving. So congratulations on that.
It's funny because back maybe 2016, people would be asking me would you ever run the community house, or would you ever be in that role? I was like, no, couldn't be me. I wouldn't do it. That's not where I see myself. So I think I have the history of AICH and also where I wanted to grow into. And right now, AICH is more focused on our youth programming aspect of our work just because, I'm thinking of the seventh generation and the next generation of myself, basically. Because, I have a daughter, she's 15, and I want her to have a place where she can go to and she can be, see and learn about her culture and other cultures as well. Growing up in the city, I was immersed in other people's culture as well, like Mohawk history or Navajo history. It wasn't just my tribe and what my mom taught me. I was, around so much community that I want, my daughter to have that experience as well and other people to have experience as well.
New York City has, the largest urban
it's about
native population,
third, yeah.
Which a lot of people don't know. And that's one of the missions of the community house is to make sure that there's representation and acknowledgement of the Native community in the area. You talked about that you have a strategy and vision for the future. What has the community house's mission been, and how do you see that shifting and changing as your role evolves?
AICH has been around since 1969, so we're one of the largest and oldest nonprofit Native organizations in New York City. So we started as a volunteer base. I think the mission of AICH is more to be an intertribal community center where it's not specific to one tribe, because there's so many in the city, and I think it's exciting to learn about other people's culture and other people's traditions, and maintaining that is one of our main focuses, is maintaining our awareness of other Indigenous culture and other communities as well, and just bringing them together, the eagle and the condor, and just bringing we're not just Indigenous to the United States, other South America tribes, people from New Zealand and Australia, they have an Indigenous in culture too, and we try to incorporate that in our mission and in our programming as well.
I think sometimes there's this push to really recognize the fake borders that have been put up, and there's a lot of different sides and different ideas about what is Native and how we define that. And I think it's wonderful that the community house has been and continues to be inclusive of Indigenous people from all over the world. It's really a beautiful thing. I remember at one point, many years ago, there was a group from Tibet, I think, that came to the community house and interacted, and that cultural exchange is really important for Indigenous people because ultimately the experience is the same. I know we have different cultures and different ways of being, but ultimately the way we're treated in the world, the Indigenous experience is very similar.
Yeah, I had a group come in, they were from Myanmar, and they were telling me about their troubles they're having out there with their population and the pollution, and it really hit home with us because my reservation in North Dakota is a big pipeline. They do a lot of oil drilling, and so I definitely understood where they're coming from. It's always going to be the government. It's always in charge of them. They can't they can't protect our lands as much, and we're both from different sides of the world, but we still have the same values and the same, trauma that happens to us as Indigenous people. And I think it's also important to remember that too. Indigenous people from the United States are not the only people that have the intergenerational trauma, and just, trying to break those cycles as well.
Right. Well, speaking of those challenges, let's get more specific and talk about urban Native communities face some unique challenges. Can you share what some of those are and how you're working to change that?
Yeah, I grew up in the suburbs of New Jersey, so I was one of the only Native kids in my school, and, growing up, people would ask me if I live in a teepee or if I, still hunted buffalo, and I'm I live down the street from you. I don't understand, what the misconception here is, but, growing up, my mom, she would come in and she would do the class presentations during November around Thanksgiving, and she would come in and talk about how she's fluent in her language, but it's her second language. English is her second language. And, growing up and going to school on a reservation, even then, she used to get beat by the nuns because she couldn't speak English, and she didn't know how to ask to use the bathroom, and she didn't know how to talk in class. And so when she graduated high school, she graduated at the 8th grade level of reading. So she couldn't really help me in school. She couldn't really help with math or English. So, it was always, I think about it now, that was, trauma from her. It was like she couldn't ask for, assistance. And I think growing up, being the only Native, none of those other kids understood like that part. Like they didn't understand that like my parents couldn't help me, like my mom couldn't help me. And also it's like, I think in New York, it's a balancing of like walking in two worlds where, you want to maintain like the whiteness or like the, I guess, being in the business sense, I guess, but you also want to connect with your culture and not try to lose those traditions that, that the government and everybody else has maintained to fight back against. So I think being in New York, it has its challenges just because there's not a lot of Natives or they're spread out all over the Tri-State area. Also, in New York at AICH, we're trying to build more of an Indigenous curriculum in school and bringing that even onto the intake form, like asking if they're an Indigenous student and getting those numbers, but they're so spread out that we have to like figure out how to break into the Board of Education and, and break those stereotypes down. So that's what we're working on now, is like working with Board of Education and getting those numbers and getting where those students are and maintain, like building up a social worker to have help with the students.
That's incredible. There's so many things that you're juggling. There's the systemic challenges that you're dealing with within the city and within government and politics. But then there's also the community where you have to be active in trying to provide outreach and make sure that people know that these resources are available to them. Can you give a couple of examples of the great programs that you have you have these gatherings at the office where people are, whether it's just having lunch or talking women's circle and things like that, if you could give a couple of examples of those wonderful programs that you have.
Yeah, we try to keep balance of having culture classes, like ribbon serving classes, beading circles, moccasin making classes, and we also do like more health conscious classes. Like we have a monthly talking circle, women's talking circle, and we also are trying to build up our youth programming. Like we're having a college social, like reaching out to the Native college students because, coming to New York is from like reservations and just even everywhere else it's hard for people. It's definitely, I've seen it happen to a lot of people where they couldn't handle New York. They had to go back, or they couldn't, understand like the train system, and just building up those outreach resources too. And so we try to build up that, and then we try to build up our mentorship program where, we're reaching out to college students, like if they want to mentor a high school student, like a big brother, big sister program, and just having those get adjusted to the city is a big part of our programming. And recently someone donated some land near Ithaca for us. We got about 4.5 acres of land up there, and we're looking to build up a resource center out there and bringing our youth to upstate and bringing them and showing them, like having Indigenous facilitators come in and show them how to live off the land. And so that's one of our projects in the future. I think a lot of our programming is more, we try to make it balanced where it's like culture and, make mentorship, and we do socials and stuff like that, and keeping, we want to start like a powwow drum circle too. So we have a lot of plans, but.
You also had something like a homework, like people can come and do homework every week.
Yeah, study hall. We did a study hall, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's amazing. But when you mentioned about people coming from other areas, and especially rural areas, and trying to navigate something like the subway, how do you have you're dealing with like really high level things, and then you have these like one-on-one interpersonal relationships where you actually have to know the struggles that people are going through. Like, how do you navigate making sure that community is cared for and they're not like lost through the cracks in terms of that?
Yeah, when I first started back in full-time, it was about 2012, it was just me and Ben. This was like the only staff, so it was only 2 people. Right now we have a staff of 9, so we've grown quite a bit in that time. And our youth and education coordinator, Drew, he's really good at reaching out to the students and reaching out at what their needs are, and reaching out to the student groups and seeing what they'd be interested in. And like next month we're planning like a powwow dance class, like teaching them, because a lot of them they reach out to us and say the students weren't aware of like what kind of categories there were, or like they'd never been to a powwow before. And so I think that's a big part of it, is reaching out to community members and see what, AICH can provide for them. And I think also like just being in community with them and just, reaching out to them just to say hi, or just like, I think a lot of that maintaining it is maintaining the relationships within the community. And I think that's what community is, like just, checking in on people.
I think it's rare. I don't think there are a lot of organizations that will take that kind of care with the community on an individual basis. That's very difficult. Just administratively, it's really a hard thing to do. So I think it's incredible. Congratulations, it's amazing. You have a social at the Whitney coming up actually this week, and this is is it the second one that's happened, or has it been several times?
It's about our fourth social there.
So having a relationship with those types of very embedded New York City institutions is important and wonderful, I suppose, but also I imagine it also has challenges in terms of, well, maybe it doesn't. Maybe explain to me what you think about having those kind of relationships, because I know you have relationship with the Whitney, the MoMA, and other New York City like foundational places. How do they interact with you and AICH in order to make these cultural events have integrity?
Yeah, I think a lot of the New York institutions are interested in not just putting out a land acknowledgement, but putting action behind the words and having, us use their space as one of the, it's a free space for us to use. And in New York City, that's gold for, just because rent is so high. Like we've had relationships with MoMA, we've done programming there, and, realizing that, Indigenous art is still a thing, and we're still here. And it's not a thing of the past. Like, we're contemporary artists, and doesn't have to be beadwork as an art form, or, that any art that is created by an Indigenous person is Indigenous art. And so that's one of our big things, is that, we're still here and that we are still making art, and that's not just ledger art, or,
it's not what they necessarily expect, or the...
Yeah, I think we have relationships with the Museum of the City of New York. They're doing a Lenape exhibit next year, and we partner with them to create more of the awareness around that, that Lenape people are still here. Also maintain those relationships and reminding them that, this is a land that was stolen from us. I think that's a lot of our work, is like educating them. And, we have a house on Governor's Island that we do Native artist residencies at. So it's open May through October, and the Native artists can use it. We try to not limit it to one specific medium. So if an actor needs it as a rehearsal space, or if a painter uses a studio space. One artist we had, they were making a jingle dress, and they needed a space just to sew because they lived in a studio apartment. So, our house is provided by the Trust of Governor's Island. And that's one of our relationships we've been maintaining and building, is the Governor's Island Trust, and, having that as an option for us. It's a free space for us to use, and granted it's seasonal, but we're hoping, in the future that it's year-round programming that we can provide out there. It's a very quiet space. Like, you're not in the city, you don't feel like you have to hustle and
Are you on?
We're in Midtown, Madison
Avenue. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's different, and it's nice. It's a beautiful space, and you do really great programs there. As an Indigenous woman leader, what does it mean to you to be in this role, and why is it critical that Indigenous women are in these types of roles?
Yeah, my mom, she was full-blood Raza Mandan, and she, our tribe is matrilineal. So during your life, you go through your mother, and you go through those traditions, and you learn from your mother. And that's a big part of my life, is I learned a lot from her, and I really cherish the times I had with her. But, I tried to instill that into my daughter and the next generation, that, everybody's not gonna be around forever. And I think it's important for women to be in those roles, because, I think we have a gentleness or an empathetic side of us that, is hardly seen. I've gone to a lot of Indian Health Service conferences growing up and working at AICH, and it's funny because most of the attendees are women at these conferences, and I think, it shows that, it's a big part of our culture is women in, matrilineal society. A lot of our tribes are, so.
So there's the care piece of it, but then there's also this like very, in my mind, I have 50,000 things juggling and I'm getting them done and they need to get done. Do you think that that's a piece of it? Do you think that being a woman in leadership, there's that advantage where women have this way to bring forward this type of balance, I guess? I guess that's the way to say it.
I also think I've had a lot of strong women role models in my life. I worked with Rosemary Richmond, and she was the longest running executive director at the community house, and she was the executive director for over 40 years. And I think that had a lot of my understanding growing up is that, at AICH, we were always government funded, and you couldn't always
you had to be very specific about where the funding
went. And I think she was really savvy and really knowledgeable in doing those business relationships and maintaining the programming. And at the end of the day, you have to do what you have to do. You think about the community first. We're really community based, and we're urban native based. I'm an example of urban native. But I still try to go back to my reservation at least once a year just to maintain that relationship. But I think it's difficult to maintain, I guess, balance it out. But
yeah,
I think as a woman, I see it as a must need.
Spoken like a true leader.
Thanks.
How has your lifelong connection with the community house and working with Rosemary shaped the way that you approach your job every day?
I think, growing up, going to community house, I saw the day-to-day of AICH, people coming in from out of town, or people just wanted to have a safe place, like a drop-in center. And that's what Rosemary really maintained. And having a place for natives to come if they just needed a warm place or just, hot food. And I think that's one of my goals is to bring back that programming, like the monthly elders luncheon or the daily luncheons where people just can come in and feel seen and feel heard. I understand Rosemary was really, I get a little emotional just because, it's funny because my daughter and Rosemary have the same birthday. And I think of her every time for Grace, my daughter's birthday. But she was really strong. She was a real strong Mohawk woman. And she understood that, the community was the most important thing. And I think it's also maintaining that balance too is still, I think, entrusted in me.
Hello listeners, Zachariah here. I just wanted to share one of my favorite sites for buying Indigenous art and learning about Indigenous artists. An Indigenous woman-owned and operated business, ProjectAntelope.com is an innovative online marketplace that features fine arts, fashion, books, music, and home goods. If you like to support Indigenous art and artists, ProjectAntelope.com is a great place to start. Tell them I sent you.
We talked about the Whitney, we talked about the MoMA, and I really like what you said about how people view Native art traditionally, it doesn't have a buffalo in it or whatever, and you're saying if a Native person made it, then that's Native art. And what do you think the role is of our art and our artists and our culture in the New York City art community?
We used to have a gallery at one point, and it was the first of its kind as a Native gallery. And 2 years ago, the Whitney had its first Indigenous curator, Joanne Quick-to-See Smith, and in 1970 she had her first art gallery opening at the community house. And it's funny to see the correlation from now and then, she's doing this big art exhibition or expo, and it was enlightening for me just to see because we had a small gallery, but it was a gallery, it was a space. Right. It was space that we could use for Native artists, any artist that could come in and want to do a curated show, and it was open to anybody. And I think that's important, just maintaining that, it doesn't have to be one specific medium, and that we are, even theater, we've been working with Spider Woman Theater and Safe Harbors, and we're trying to build up those partnerships with Native theater, because, it's not just art in that form, but it's also songs and writing and dance. I think as Indigenous people, it's big in our culture, and not to forget that we are still here and we're contemporary people, and that it grows with us, and just maintaining that Indigenous art isn't an oil painting, or we try to explore other options as well.
So how does AICH engage with city government to make sure that Native voices are heard and represented?
We have a relationship with the mayor's office in New York City right now, and we've also trying to build up those relationships with the Board of Education, and getting in that door has been a hassle itself, but we have there's a Native liaison at the Commission on Human Rights, and I think that's one of the first of its kind, but it's also played by a white guy. There's a white guy in that road right now, and one of the big part is getting more Indigenous people involved too, and building up those relationships and networking, and because a lot of people still don't think we're here, or we're a big population. I mean, we're less than 1%, but still it's still less than 1%. It's still a number, and we still have our rights, and us as Natives, we have treaty rights, or we have the right to be here and to be acknowledged. And having the first liaison at the Commission of Human Rights being 2022, it's where have we been the rest of the time? But it's also last year was the first Native American Heritage Month celebration at the mayor's office, and that's shocking because we've been here so long, but it's also the 400th anniversary of the Dutch coming over, so it's come on. So
that's when they decided to have an Indigenous. Yeah.
So
that's nice.
Yes.
What can we tell our audience about how they can support AICH if somebody wanted to donate or provide any kind of resources that might be helpful to you? How can they reach out, and what can they do?
Yeah, I'm always open. My cell phone number is on the website, so anybody's open to contact me anytime. But we also, right now, AICH is donation-based, so our funding is mostly donated. We have, in partnership, it's called the Mannahatta Fund. It's a group of 5 volunteers, and they're all quote-unquote sellers, but I like to call them allies. It started in 2019. And it's a volunteer base where they reach out to donors that have more of the intergenerational wealth. They've donated a lot to us in the past 5 years. It's definitely grown, and we try to maintain that relationship through the Mannahatta Fund. And with those funds, we support other organizations. We provided funding through American Law Alliance and the Lenape Collective, and we funded other projects outside of that, and it's not something AICH related only. They provided to us the AICH, and I think I see it as a tree trunk. AICH is a tree trunk, and we try to branch out and try to give the funding, redistribute it to other organizations, Native organizations throughout the city.
It's incredible, and I really appreciate when the stories of people who have that intergenerational wealth and who are ethically investing the money, looking at the past and trying to rectify what's happened, and making sure that those investments go to advocating for people who have not had those resources. And then to look at AICH as the starting point. I understand the challenge of being mostly donation-based or trying to fundraise through grants and foundations and things like that. So audiences, if you're listening,
yeah, you go to Mannahatta Fund.
You gotta always, make those donations. They can be small, they can be extra large, and really, obviously, everything that Trish and the Community House is done with such care and thoughtfulness about the community. And
most of our donors are small one-time monthly donors, but they're small donations, but they add up.
They add up.
And I think also we have our development director, Marin. They are a settler. They're not Native. I think Marin's our only non-Indigenous staff member, but they do a great job of learning our history and learning the history of AICH. And I think they do a great job of seeing the vision of AICH and putting into the grants and stuff we apply for.
I think bridging the perspective between Marin and you together is really strong.
Yeah, we're strong in that sense. They understand, that at one point H didn't have money, and that's when Manhattan Fund came in, and that's how it started. Is, you know, H only had about $200 in her account at that time, and it's not something that, you know, we speak of, but, you know, it happened, and that is traumatic for us. Like, how could we support our community if we can't support ourselves? And then when the Manhattan Fund started, that's when I think it was a rebirth of H, a revitalization of H. And I'm, you know, honored to be part of that journey of H and to be a leader in that community. So.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second. H is such a long history, and it's been such a foundation. And everyone in the city looks to H, you know, like the mayor's office, everyone's like, H, this, and this, and they want something from you, or they want to learn, or they need a partnership or a representation or something. And there's times as in any nonprofit where funding is going okay and funding is not going okay. And when you're talking about those shifts, and that there was a point where maybe there was $200 in the bank account and H still existed, and H was still doing programs because it was important to the community that had an investment in making sure that H continued.
Yeah.
I think that's just an example of the strength of the organization and the community, because it's not easy to do that, like you said.
Yeah, I think, you know, during that time, I think H looked at its past. You know, H started as a volunteer organization. They used to meet in church basements and other spaces that was free until they got incorporated, until they could apply for government grants. But then even then, it's the nonprofit complex where, you know, you're writing these grants to fit this mold, but then, like, are you doing that programming, or, like, is it really viable for us? You know, it's always a hardship on nonprofits in general. I don't see it just as an Indigenous thing. I think it's just a nonprofit thing. Yeah. So.
And especially now is the future, and no one knows what it holds. So individual donors are really important at this point.
I think it's also to think about, you know, we were groveling for the government funding, and the government was trying to take us out. Like, you know, the government's trying to take out Indigenous people in general. It's like we're always having to bend over backwards for the government. And so, you know, as the Manhattan Fund has created this way that we don't have to, it's unrestricted.
It's a freedom.
We have, it's a sovereignty of where, you know, Indigenous sovereignty of where we can say, like, we want to provide funding for this organization and we want to do this, but, you know, they trust us with that relationship too.
It's incredible. Looking ahead, what are your hopes for H? Yeah, I guess I just want to know that. What are your hopes for H? Let's talk about fun stuff.
I know, the 5-year plan. Right now, H, we are in the process of moving, actually. We're looking for a bigger space. We're looking for a space that we could hold bigger events at. Because right now, I think our office space holds like 30 people at the most. And, you know, our Christmas party, I think we had like 42 people. So it was packed. But, you know, building up more programming where we can hold those monthly luncheons and have people come in and have more of a staff in presence. Like right now, we only have like 2 or 3 staff members in the office just because it's a small office space. And you know, we're looking to build out our health department and having more like a CHR aspect where somebody can go and do those in-person visits and in-person, you know, help with medical needs, and not where it's just giving them money and just, you know, providing that connection. And, you know, some people can't, you know, make it to the community house, so we want somebody to come in and help them. You know, my mom, she was a CHR, but she used to have her own way about it, where she would go after hours, like after work, she would go see clients, or she would go on her lunch break to go to the park and see, you know, our homeless clients. And, you know, I try to build on that legacy of her always committing to the community. And I think that's one of my visions of H, is like bringing those more in-person events together and bringing community together again. And, you know, with the pandemic, it's been hard to readjust. You know, with our land of state, we want to bring more people up there and, you know, show them how to build a seed bank and like how to do all this stuff that, you know, we're going back to our roots that is so important. So.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I you have so much on your plate.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm just so impressed, and not just from the conversation today, but seeing your social media. AICH is on Instagram, AICH is on Facebook, and the Mannahatta Fund has an incredible newsletter that you should sign up for. There's so much information and education in that newsletter that I really enjoy. And so I just seeing all of that happening all the time is really hopeful. And I appreciate your work, and I appreciate that you took the time to spend talk with us today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm honored to be here.
This episode was recorded at the podcast studio in the Philadelphia building, made possible by the support of CultureWorks Greater Philadelphia.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of From Here with a View, a We Are the Seeds Philadelphia podcast. Please subscribe, share with a friend, and leave us a review. You'll be helping us grow our listener community and elevate the impact of our podcast. You can learn more about this podcast at wearetheseeds.org. From Here with a View is executive produced by Michelle St. John with Zachariah Julian and Tailinh Agoyo producing. Sound mixing and original theme music by Zachariah Julian. To listen to more from Zachariah, follow him on Spotify and Apple Music. From Here with a View logo art was inspired by an original oil pastel drawing by artist Jason Wiesel. Graphic design by Fernanda Leon. This podcast was funded in part by Independence Public Media Foundation.